Special welcome to another podcast. I am excited to be joined by Jeroen, all the way from the Netherlands. He is a strategy expert and an author as well. Jeroen, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
I have just been so intrigued and amazed at your depth of knowledge around strategy and what you share, especially on LinkedIn. You can tell by the amount of engagement that you get on your posts that, a lot of what you share resonates with people. And that's what drew me to you. Got your LinkedIn and I've been learning quite a lot about a new perspective of how to deal with strategy. But let's start this conversation by you introducing yourself, just so that our viewers, our listeners can get to know a little bit about you. Tell us who you are and the career journey that you've walked to get to where you are today.
Good. So let me start with my name, because the very first question I always get, how do you pronounce your name? Jeroen Kraaijenbrink. I'm a Dutch person, so I live in the Netherlands, and it's a very common Dutch name, but I've also experienced that at every other place in the world, it's impossible to pronounce. So Jeroen Kraaijenbrink, if you like to practice. Yeah, so my career started at a university. So after my studies, I did a PhD, became an assistant professor, became an associate professor. So I was really on an academic career track, and until 15 years ago, something like that. And then I thought, okay, is this really my career for the rest of my life? And I wanted to have a more visible and direct impact on the real world. So I started as an independent consultant. So right out of the university, got my first client, got my second client, and so on. And that's something I'm still doing on an everyday basis. So that's one of the things is strategy consulting. Another thing I do is mentoring. So I help individual people figure out, let's say, where to go with their business, with their career, with the department they are leading. And also writing. I have a couple of books, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, as you already said. So it's really a gradual shift from strategy research and teaching to strategy consulting, mentoring, and writing. So the core topic has always been strategy, but in very different roles. And that's what I like very much about my current career, is that I'm combining a lot of different things, but all very much connected to the same very core.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I like to start conversations with definitions, just basics of concepts. Let's start by defining what strategy is. I know a lot of people know what strategy is, but it's always nice to hear it from an expert and a practitioner. How do you define strategy in your world?
Oh, yes. And there are indeed, many people know what strategy is, but opinions differ extremely. Like this, every author has their own definition. So I have my own as well. For me, strategy is an organization's unique way of sustainable value creation. So there's very much a focus on how do you create value through your products and services, for whom, so which kind of customers, because that's the core of an organization. If you don't create value for a group of customers, what's your right to exist? Why should you be there? So that's the core. The unique part means you want to do this in a different way, a distinct way that stands out from the competition. And the sustainable part means you're doing this for the long run, not just for tomorrow, but for a longer period. So this is the shortest definition I could develop. It's also the core of my books. Of course, in itself, it's not, I didn't invent it. It's based on others. So it's based on a lot of giants in the field, famous professors that have written a lot about strategy. But it is the definition of strategy that I work with in everything I do.
Excellent. So I love the fact that you combine the issue of bringing value and sustainability and the customer at the center of it all. Why do you think then it's important for every organization to craft a strategy?
Yeah, to create some guidance, stability, and alignment in the organization. Like without a strategy, it's very hard to get all people on the same page, have actions aligned. You get a lot of fragmentation, and oftentimes you also get a lot of ad hoc, short-term, reactive kind of behavior. And with a strategy, you try to create some stability, a common frame of reference, so that you don't jump from one thing to the other, but kind of know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that prepares you, I think, better for the long term than just responding to what happens around you in the environment.
Mm, mm, mm. So I've also been very intrigued by your passion around this topic. What is it that makes you so passionate about strategy?
Yeah, that's. I'm not 100% sure. I've been asked this question more often. I think it's a combination that this is kind of it's about the entire organization. So it's about integrating everything an organization does. And that I find fascinating. So it's not just about marketing, not just about finance, not just about operations, but one level higher where you combine all this, one level more generic. That's one part I like about it. The other is perhaps that I've been frustrated throughout my, let's say, the beginning of my career. I found myself teaching all kind of models. That's what a typical MBA program, a typical strategy textbook. There's a lot of models in there, like the SWOT, like the Five Forces framework, the Pastel or the D-Step, the Balanced Scorecard, and so on and so forth. And I find myself deeply dissatisfied at some point in time. What am I doing? Is this really helping organizations to develop and implement strategy? And so I saw a lot of room for improvement. There was another driver. And at the same time, if you, because I've been doing research on it, I've been reading a lot on this topic. At the time, I was a researcher and still also see the answers are not rocket science. They are there. So we have kind of a field that seems to be stuck in an old way of doing things. We have the solution. It's very relevant. So I think that combination is still keeping me passionate about this topic even after 20 years.
Mm, 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 mm. Awesome, awesome. So I like the way you bring a fresh viewpoint, to the conversation to say we have the answers. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think the process. We know there's a lot of research on strategy problems, like why are things going wrong, and when you know the problems, the solutions are not that difficult. For instance, one of the problems is that many strategies are not clear enough, not concrete enough, not detailed enough. So what do you need to do? Make them more concrete and detailed. That's not difficult, but you need to do it. The other thing is that people across an organization are often not involved enough in the process. So it's still typical a top management exercise. The board of executives, the board of management, the management board, they develop the strategy, and then it's kind of supposed to trickle down in the organization so that everyone executes it. That doesn't work, and we know that it doesn't work. And so the solution, the answer is also pretty straightforward. It's involve people in the process. So in that sense, there are lots of problems identified over the past 3, 4, 5 decades of research, and the solutions are there. It's just that for some reason, most, or maybe not, yeah, I think most companies still do not really adopt these kind of alternative ways of generating and executing strategy.
Yeah, so in reading your content, in reading your publications, I was very, very interested in your perspective around the fact that strategy is everyone's business.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just explained that. But in my mind, I'm thinking, what does that look like in practical terms within an organization setup?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions about strategy, that strategy is something for the top of the organization, and then we have tactics and operations below that. The way I look at strategy is much more an aspect of everyone's business. So if you are a team lead, if you are a manager, even if you are just an employee responsible for their own job, you can look at your job, at your department, at your division from a strategic perspective. So you can look at what does it do for, how does this help create value for our customers? You can look at what are the trends, the developments going on around my field, around my job, what is relevant there. You can look at what kind of competences do I need to build with my team, with my unit, in order to contribute to the company's strategy. So it's more a mindset, a way of thinking that applies at every level in the organization rather than just something at the top. And once you see it as an aspect of everyone's job, it becomes quite a natural thing to do, because you can at every level you can talk about these things, you can think about these things, you can make decisions about what can I do in order to to make the strategy of our company stronger.
So then, are you sort of advocating for a bottom-up kind of model where everybody is contributing? Then, at the strategic level, we then tie it up so that it's a strategy that everybody has a buy-in. Is that the viewpoint that you take?
Yeah, I think bottom up, I think what you describe is correct. I think bottom up may not be the right word, because bottom up suggests it really comes from the bottom, and then kind of the top has to accept what comes from the bottom. But I think it's all directions at the same time. It's top down, it's bottom up, it's middle out, if you like. The point is that you involve people all together in the same process, and not start somewhere and then give it to someone else, but co-create it on all levels.
So I'm thinking of the practicality side of things within an organization. So usually the practice with many organizations is that, the top executive team goes away, for 2 days, 3 days, they craft the strategy, then they come back and they communicate it to their employees. How would you see this playing out? Are we shipping everybody in the organization to go away and be in one room, the top, the bottom, and then we co-create this strategy?
That is one approach, by the way. It's not an approach that I use, but it's called a whole system approach, where indeed you sometimes there are people doing these kind of interventions with thousands of people in a room and really kind of do that what you described. My approach would be different. First, I would not go somewhere else. I think that's one important mistake, is that we literally kind of disconnect strategy from the everyday business by assuming that we have to go somewhere else, to a nice resort, great hotel. We do something serious in the morning, we have fun and do some team building in the afternoon, something like that. I think that's also a misconception. I think when we keep strategy on our own premises, we also kind of make it clear that it is part of normal business. So we've made it so exceptional and special, while it should be a normal business process. So that's one thing. I think do it in your offices, on the place you work. And the other difference is it's not like this short-term event thing. That's another, I think, a misconception, is that strategy is this kind of event-based thing in a company where you go and sit together like 2-3 days or even 1 day. It's a continuous process that goes on throughout the year. It never stops, it never starts, like any other business process, which basically is a continuous process. So you want this to be part of the annual, the quarterly, the monthly rhythm that you have in your organization at every level. So during your management, your quarterly meetings, strategy should be on the agenda. During your end, I think you need to do an annual update of your strategy to make sure you're still doing the right thing. In your monthly department meetings, you can make strategy part of that meeting and see, okay, what has changed? What have we achieved in the past month? How have we contributed to achieving our strategy? So it's really get rid of the idea of strategy of doing that in an event offsite, to make it an integrated business process throughout the organization and throughout the year.
I really love that perspective, and that has always been, my style throughout, and that has sort of resonated. It sort of almost sound counter-cultural in terms of the way people do it, because people actually wait towards the end of the year or the financial year to sort of measure, the success of strategy. Let's talk about strategy and agility in the context of what you've just explained, where strategy is an ongoing engagement that happens nearly on a daily basis or at every meeting.
Yeah, so it's yes and no. So it has to do a lot with agility, but also not entirely as often suggested. I think what it does, it makes strategy much more a short cycle process, where rather than doing it every 3 or 5 years, you do it every year, and within the year you look at it every quarter and so on. So that makes it more agile. The difference, and why I resist a little bit to calling it agile, is if you really make it agile, you adapt continuously and you change it continuously. And if you do so, you undermine the whole point of having a strategy, because the one thing that a strategy is trying to do, and that's what I also explained in the beginning, is create a common frame of reference, create some stability for a certain period. So if you craft a strategy in 2023, and you are revising it radically in 2024 and in 2025, then the whole point of having a strategy is lost as well. So what I always say is, okay, monitor very actively. So we really want to keep abreast of what is changing internally, what is changing externally, to be sure that if we need to change, that we will change. So monitor actively, but change reluctantly. So let's try to stick on our course. Let's try to stick to our strategy, unless there is a real need to make the change.
Let's talk about the monitoring of strategy. You're talking about constantly monitoring the strategy. What are the benefits that come with constantly monitoring the strategy, and what tools or how can people be able to do that on a constant basis?
The last question probably takes more than the entire recording we have here. Because that's really the content of my books, is how to do that thoroughly, to create, how do you turn strategy into this continuous adaptive process over time. But the short answer, what I find important, and I also write that in several books, is that we monitor relevance, progress, and mood. And so that's a very rough categories. Relevance means, are we still is the strategy still relevant? So are there important changes in the company or outside the company that make that we have to change? For instance, the biggest competitor has gone bankrupt, or a new legislation has come, or COVID has happened, or war has happened, or any big event internally, externally, probably means we have to adjust our strategy. So we always need to monitor, is it still relevant, or do we need to change? The second thing is progress. That's the typical project management type of monitoring. Are we doing the right things? Are we on track? Are we making progress, and so on? The third thing is mood. Are people still on board? Do people still believe in the strategy? Are they excited? How's the temperature? How's the climate in the organization? So when we monitor these three, and there's many different ways of doing that, we make sure we pay attention to the three core elements, because if the strategy is not relevant anymore, we're doing the wrong things. If there's no progress, we're not doing it in the right way. And if the mood is not good, then it's an early warning indicator that you will run into problems probably next quarter or next year, because people kind of started to become disengaged. The way to do this, and especially for the relevance part, that's very much also the heart of my approach. Is the tool I'm using for that is what I call the strategy sketch. That's the core tool in the strategy handbook. In the 1 Hour Strategy, another book, it's the 6M framework, but they are basically the same framework, but one is a more simplified version of the other. So what it is, it's opening up the black box of strategy on one page. So we have one model, like the business model canvas, for those of you who are familiar with that, have one model with all elements of strategy. And the advantage of having one model with all elements of strategy is that you can use it to diagnose your current strategy. You can use it to design a new strategy, but you can also use it to monitor your strategy over time. So you can ask, and some of the elements in there are the value proposition, customers and needs, competition, risk and costs, organizational climate, trends and uncertainties. For all of these elements, you can continuously look at what has changed. Are there new trends? What has changed on the competition side? What has changed internally in terms of our resources and competencies? And then you can ask, does this change mean we can still stay on course, or do we need to adjust the rest of our strategy as well? So that's a little bit of an insight into my toolbox and how I do it with clients, how I teach it, how I do it with my mentoring.
Beautiful and very, very insightful. The other conversation that people always talk about is that strategy rate of failure is very high. And I see that you agree with that as well. Mm-hmm. What is the current state of affairs when it comes to strategy failure, and how can we start changing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actual numbers, I don't know. And it really depends also on how you define success and failure and how you measure. But what I've seen in a lot of scientific articles from the last 3-4 decades, so from the 90s until now, that the failure rates they report are quite similar. And there's a very broad range. Some say 50% failure, some even say 90% failure. So it's a broad range, but I think it very much depends on what people count as a failure. Some would say if you're not doing exactly as you planned, maybe a failure. Then I think failure rate is 100% because you never completely can realize what you said. On the other extreme, it's probably nothing has really changed, and I think that's a true failure when there is really no action, no movement, no change. So somewhere between 50-80% failure rates is what people that have researched this report as failure rates. You also asked about the reasons and what to do about this. I think quite a part of the answer we have already talked about in our previous in answering the previous questions. I think it is this strange idea of what strategy is, that it is this offsite, this event-based, that it is for the top. So it's really about fixing those problems and bringing back strategy into an organization, make it part of the everyday, every week, every month, every year conversation at all levels. And that's also what I said in the beginning, like the answers, the solutions are basically known. There is research on having people participate in strategy and that it leads to better results. Okay, so we know that. We also know that turning the strategy into something more concrete so that people actually understand it and actually know what to do so that you can turn it into actions helps. So yeah, do that. So there's lots of things, and what I try to do in my approach in my books is actually gather all those things that we already know and combine that into a systematic approach. Because I think that's one of the reasons I do what I do is, even though there are, I don't know, 10,000 books on strategy, if you go to Amazon or any other large bookstore, and of course I have not read all of them, but I've been seeking quite actively for one book that gave me a good approach as a consultant. So when I stepped out of academia and started as a consultant, that's what I was eagerly looking for. Like, hey, give me an approach, a stepwise approach, complete, including strategy generation and execution. And I could not find that. And that's why I thought, okay, even though there are so many books, let me write my own, because I need this method with my clients. So basically, I started developing these books and this approach because I could not find it anywhere else.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one of the things that I've enjoyed that you have actually talked about is the threefold watershed between strategy and execution. Do you want to
Mhm.
speak to that?
Yeah, sure. And again, part of that I've mentioned, but I think there's three disconnects that we have, and with we, I mean strategy people, teachers, researchers, consultants over the past like half a century have created. I think one of them is the disconnect between those who develop strategy and those who execute. So within an organization, we have created a split. The top generates, the rest executes. And this is not just in strategy, but this entire split between those who think and those who do is quite deeply ingrained in how we think about organization. Even think about the terminology, like the head of a department. It's literally like say, okay, the head, that's where the thinking happens, and the rest and the body, the organization has to execute. So that goes back a couple of centuries ago. That thinking in terms of splitting thinking and doing. It's really from the Western Enlightenment period, Rene Descartes, for instance, that we have started thinking about ourselves and also about organization in this way. So that's one, that's the first watershed, is splitting it in the organization. The second is time. We, we've split strategy and execution in time. First, we develop the strategy, we formulate it, we finalize it, and then we execute. So there's a clear split in time, which is another watershed, because the translation from formulation to execution, that's where the big problems happen. And also this, it's very deeply ingrained in our thinking, is we have to think first and then do. It's kind of this typical advice you would give to someone who's doing silly things, is think first and then act. But that's not really how it works in practice, because you are currently, as any organization, currently you're executing some strategy. Even if you're not aware, you are serving some customers and not all customers in the world. So you have made implicit choices there. You have some products, but not all products. So you have made choices. So you are always executing, and at the same time, you should always be, I think, working on your strategy as well. So that's the second watershed, is splitting these two activities in time. And the third one is in location, which you already talked about. Taking strategy really out of the office, out of the facilities, and do it somewhere else, which really sends out the wrong signal. It says, okay, this is special. It's also for an exclusive group of people, because they deserve, they are smart, they know what to do, and let's develop this with them. While if you think about it, it's quite interesting, because I would think that the more complex something is, the more people you'd like to involve, the more perspectives you like to hear, the more facts, the more different viewpoints. And I would think strategy is one of the most complex things in a company, because it integrates everything else. So by definition, it's pretty complex. And then for some reason, we have decided at some point in time that should be kind of for some exclusive group of people that do it somewhere else. If you really think about it, it's quite interesting and maybe even contradictory. So bring back the strategizing to the company. So that's the third watershed.
Very, very insightful. Very insightful. Let's now look at how to effectively communicate the strategy to the organization. What are some of the ways that you have found work well?
I think one of the current ideas is that we don't need a written strategic plan. I'm a bit against that, because what I've seen is, in whatever form you communicate your strategy, whether it's an animation, a PowerPoint presentation, a poster, a one pager, anything. What happens if you give it to two, three, four different people in the company? You get two, three, four different stories. So what you would need is one underlying consistent story explaining what the strategy is and why it is the way it is. So for me, I always create, or virtually always with clients when I work with them, I create like a 25 page document with quite some details and telling the logic of the strategy. So there's a section on where do we come from, what are some of the key strengths and related weaknesses that we have as a company, what's the status quo, what are the important developments, then what are our high level ambitions, how do these high level ambitions translate to our products and services and markets, and how do these translate to our organization, to the structure, the culture, the processes, and so on. And you need that coherent story, because you need to understand why do we make some choices, for instance, in changing the organizational structure. Why do we make some changes in order, or in the products and services we offer, or why do we want to invest in building up some new competences? Because you want to see how it contributes to the overarching picture. So I always write this document down, and another reason for that is to create a real clarity, because my experience is when you don't write something down, it seems very clear in your head, but actually it's not. And it's actually one of the reasons why I write. Why do I write books? Why do I write on LinkedIn? Is to clarify my own thoughts. And every time I do that, well, the writing itself is a way of clarification, explanation, finding the blind spots in your thinking, finding the contradictions. So you need all of that, putting things on paper, in writing, in order to get the message clear. So to get the content right, to get the message clear, you need this core, I think, foundational document, which I call a joint strategic view, because it's much more a joint viewpoint than a plan. There are no timelines in there, no steps, and so on. Once we have that, then you can communicate it in many different ways, because mostly sending out a plan to your organization is not very useful. People won't read it, people won't understand it, it's too much. But once you have that common foundation, you can create a poster, you can create some videos, you can create animations, you can create shorter versions, you can do everything, because you are basing it on the very same document. So that's how I try to make sure that the communication is done in the right way. And an interesting story for one of my clients a couple of years ago, we did exactly the same. So we produced the document, and what he said at the end is, okay, thank you very much. He was very happy with the document, but he also said, I'm never going to show it to anyone. But he was very much, but I'm very glad we have it, because it clarified my thinking. It's a good reference document for me, but I don't want to bother others with it. So even if you're not sharing it, it has its role, because it has served clarifying what the strategy is and why it is the way it is.
That's a very interesting story that you tell. From an expert point of view, do you recommend that, people do not share the strategy document? What are your views on that?
Depends very much on the organization, whether people are ready to read something like that. I think generally it's not very effective to share it with everyone. Maybe make it available. I think you want to be transparent. One of the key values when I work with a client, I think transparency, openness is very important during the process, but also in the strategy. So maybe you want to make it accessible, but not push it, and don't force people to read it, because the entire document is not relevant for them, because everyone has their own department, their own job, their own role. And what you need to do is translate, help them understand what it means for them. And it's a good question, because one of the problems that I also see is then the strategy is there, and then people send it out, or in whatever other way they communicate and say, okay, go and execute. The missing step is translating it to their particular job, division, team. For instance, if we are the production department, we get the overarching strategy. There's maybe some specific points about production in there, but largely not, because it's about the entire company. So we have to help the people in production, have to help translate what is in the overarching strategy to what it means for them. Same for marketing, same for HR. And if you have different divisions, for instance, you're serving different markets or having different product categories as a larger company, you need people to help translate the overarching strategy to what it means for them. And that part has very often been forgotten, or it's skipped, and it's kind of thrown over the fence. Like, we have our strategy, go and execute. That doesn't work. And it's not because people resist. It's not that they don't want to do it, but they don't understand what it means for them. And that's not because they're stupid or ignorant. No, it's because you have not helped them translate what it means for them. You need to do that also as part of the process.
Absolutely insightful and very, very practical. So I love what you're saying. That whole point of translating into an aspect that a person can relate to within their sphere of work is very, very important. Otherwise, these things are just statements that have been written that people cannot relate to. I really love that viewpoint that you bring to the conversation. Let's look at how to measure the success of a strategy. How do people measure this?
Yeah, I think generally we should not overemphasize the measurement part, because that's what I see often, is that there's a lot of attention to all kind of measures, KPIs, and then we create kind of complicated monitoring and measurement systems to measure whether we make progress. Because what you get then is very KPI-driven behavior. Instead of buying into the overarching idea of the strategy, people start optimizing their behaviors to the specific KPIs that you measure. So you have to be very careful in using very precise and a lot of KPIs. The way I look at strategy is much more as a direction than as an endpoint. So for me, in most of the strategy documents I create with people, there are never kind of hard targets. They're never like, okay, we have to achieve this. It's very qualitative, much less quantitative than people are used to in most strategic plans. So it's a qualitative and it's a direction. What I find most important in terms of measuring success is, are we moving in the direction that we laid out in our strategy? Are we making progress? Not have we exactly achieved are we exactly where we want to be? Because probably not. Because in the meanwhile, the world has changed, the organization has changed, all kind of developments have been there. The main thing is movement, change, activity. So are we, and that's where in the plan we have our high-level ambitions. Are we moving in the direction of those ambitions? So for me, measuring the progress, the relevance and the mood is what, as we talked about earlier. If you do that on a pretty high level, every quartile, every year, and so on, you know pretty well whether you are on track or not, without necessarily needing a large set of quantitative indicators, all kind of dashboards, and all of that.
Very, very interesting perspective, and I totally align with that viewpoint. Because also you are looking at, are you moving in the right direction? I think it also takes away pressure, because people can be very much obsessed with the numbers. Are we meeting the numbers? Are we on target? But the question is, where do you draw the balance between just letting everything float, because we are making incremental, progress, and there's no quantification, and also people just obsessing with the quantities or the numbers.
That's very hard to answer, because but indeed, I think that the point you're making, it is about balance. Because of course, what I'm not supporting the idea here that, okay, just let everything let it go and don't steer and don't control. So for me, it is always keep in mind, okay, what were our intentions? So what are the high level ambitions, and are we moving in that direction? And we can make a qualitative assessment. Like if we say something about how we want to improve our the mindset and culture, rather than spending a lot of time on defining very precise indicators of what that culture is, because then you never, and I'm taking the most difficult one probably, because culture is so abstract and intangible. But if we make a qualitative assessment with a diverse group of people who all make have an assessment, have we moved into, let's say, are we still moving in the right direction? Is it still relevant? Is there still progress? Is the mood still okay? We can even using like simple scales, like a 5-point scale, or when you talk about mood, work with emojis from very sad to very happy. The point is not so much the score itself, but when you, for instance, with a group, with your team, you ask the question like, are we making sufficient progress towards the cultural change on a 1 to 5 scale? Different people will fill that out. You get a discussion, and it's not about the number, but it's about what do you diagnose? Where are we making the right progress? Where are we not making the right progress? And throughout the way I work with clients, it's very much based on, let's say, diversity of perspectives and integrating that. So if you ask 10 different people with very different perspectives, very different roles, different experience, different mindsets, so have a heterogeneous team, put them together and ask them those questions, you get probably different answers, but you are approaching the truth, and I mean truth with a small t, because the truth, it's not so relevant and it's not there in strategy. You're getting pretty close. So it's what I use is very much what some people write about, the wisdom of the crowds. So crowdsourcing, that's on a bigger scale, but the logic is the same. If we have a variety of people with different perspectives, and you bring them together in a process, and whether that's in strategy making, in managing progress, in managing progress and relevance and so on, you get pretty close to a good judgment of whether you're doing the right thing. So that's very much how the same way of working in strategy development, but also in strategy monitoring, updating, is this diversity of perspectives, bringing that together and having those judgments count very strongly in the whole process.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Jeroen, you've brought so much value, and you've dropped a lot of great insights. As we start closing this conversation, I would love us to also look at how a company can adapt its strategy to changing markets. As you know, the rate of change is extremely high. And now with just the introduction of so much technology in the market space, that has actually just accelerated the rate of change. How can organizations adapt their strategy to changing markets?
Yeah, and I think the motto here, like monitor actively, change reluctantly, it still applies also here. I think most companies kind of need to build in some sort of check, like, is it really changing that much? Because there is a lot of the perception that the world is more complex, more uncertain, more volatile, and so on than ever before. And part of that may be true, but if you realize that people were saying this 3,000 years ago as well, and kept on saying it, so it seems like also a kind of a human way of thinking that the world is always going faster and becoming more uncertain, complex. So I'm not denying that there are faster changes, but I think that's the first thing you need to do: develop a mindset and say, okay, let's pause for a moment. Let's not get ourselves crazy. let's take ground and think: is it really that much? Is it really changing that much? So that's the first, I think, the very first important filter for not just changing in the market, but any other external development. Because if you do not have that filter, you get crazy, you get stressed. There's a lot of anxiety, because if you listen to what everyone is saying, indeed, it seems the world is extremely out of control. I don't know. That, as I said, that has been the feeling for 3,000 years. There's documentation about that. People worrying about that. And for the rest, I think, and I won't repeat it, but the answer is again the short cycle approach. Monitor on a monthly, quarterly basis, and always ask the question: okay, we see this change here. Can we still move on in the same way, or do we need to make a change elsewhere? So if we see a change in the market, customers want something else, then we have to ask: does it affect our products, or can we still keep the products the same for the next year? Does it mean we need to start building new competences? Does it mean we need to establish new partnerships? Does it mean we need to change something in our organization? As long as the answer to those questions is no, we can stay on course there. Maybe one thing to add here is we should not, and that's maybe another misconception, is that the strategy can only be changed as a whole. So we have a strategy now for the next 5 years, and then in 5 years we kind of completely redesign it. The way I look at it is much more a incremental change. So from 1 year to the other, or from 1 quarter to the other, we might change some elements of it. So maybe there is a change in the competences because we want to replace some people or add new technologies to what we're doing. But it doesn't change our products and services. It doesn't change the market. It doesn't change our revenue model. Or maybe we want to make some changes in the partners whom we work with. But the rest of the organization remains the same. The rest of the strategy remains the same. So when we see the strategy as a kind of integrated whole of all kinds of elements, you change these elements kind of organically from time to time, but it doesn't mean the entire strategy changes. You just make small local adjustments to some parts, try to keep the rest intact as long as possible.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. This has been such a great conversation and great insights. Thank you so much for just generously sharing your knowledge and your insights to the listeners. Do you have any closing remarks as we part company?
No, just thank you for the excellent questions, because you give me the possibility to really share I think what I'm passionate about, and what I think needs to change in strategy. So you've given me all the room to talk about the way I look at strategy. So thank you for that.
Absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. And hopefully we can have more engagement, and you can bring more value to many people across the globe. For now, it's ciao, ciao. Have a great day.
Yes, have a great